Hey guys, Jason Up of the New 80s Revolution. Tonight is a bit of a sad night, a bit of a somber mood here in the Nerd Cave, because you and I are going to take a trip back to the greatest toy store on Earth, the place where every kid could be a kid. But unfortunately, tonight, you and I, the New 80s Revolution, are going to say goodbye to the world's greatest toy store, Toys R Us. Take a walk with me as I show you what's left of the place we have all grown up a part of, Toys R Us. was very tough to walk through that store and see what it was starting to become. That footage was from about 2.5 weeks ago. I can't imagine what it looks like today. In fact, the two stores near me are both open for another 2 or 3 weeks. So my guess now is that there's even less stuff, and probably fixtures all moved to the front of the store for purchase. You know, we've all seen stores come and go. Kmart's are starting to close. Sears stores are starting to close. We all went through the KB toy store closing several years ago. But I don't think any of those had the impact that something like Toys R Us closing has, for lots of different reasons. I mean, toys are starting to become less important in a kid's life, and this definitely verifies that, to me anyways. I mean, whatever the reason, competition, prices, online stuff, we can all add that to the list of reasons why this is happening. But to me, I feel like the biggest reason is that toys and kids are starting to separate. For lots of reasons, for electronics, for video games, for iPads, for, you know, whatever else that takes a kid's mind away from toys. I think the desire to grow up fast, to be more accepted by peers, and I suppose being a kid is now becoming a thing of the past. So I thought I would take this time tonight to talk about a few of my favorite Toys R Us memories. You guys have all heard the story about how I found the LJN steel cage, completely unknown to me that it even existed, and I stumbled upon it in the aisles of Toys R Us. That is definitely a top memory for me. All throughout the mid to late 80s, Toys R Us was a place that I probably visited once a month, because I was always on the hunt for those wrestling figures. And my grandmother, anytime that I would sleep over there, which was about once a month, anytime I'd sleep over their house, we'd get in the car and head to Toys R Us. So it was such a great feeling to walk up and down the wrestling figure aisle and stumble across a new figure that I needed. Also, like I've told you before, I remember seeing the giant G.I. Joe Cobra Terradome hanging from the ceiling of Toys R Us. They had it strung up on fishing wire, and this thing, as massive as it is today, you can imagine how massive it was to an 8 or 9-year-old kid. I certainly remember when Nintendo first started coming out, and Toys R Us would have their video games in the middle of the store. So they'd have 1 or 2 aisles dedicated to just video games. And the way they did it back then was very unique, in that you would go down the aisle and you would see all of the game boxes flattened and put behind plastic. And underneath that was a tag, a ticket that you would pull, and then walk to the front of the store where they had all these video games behind glass and this long counter that somebody would stand behind. And you'd basically hand them your ticket, and they would go into this library of Nintendo, of Sega Master System, eventually of Sega Genesis and Nintendo, Super Nintendo, and they would go and they would pull your game for you. And of course, at the end of the aisle, usually in the discounted or clearance section, were the Atari games that were trying to be shoved out the door. You know, I remember some competition that we had in town, Kitty City, which was the same layout, same concept. But for some reason, there was just something more special about Toys R Us. I don't know if it was the marketing, if it was all the commercials, if it was the Jeffrey the giraffe, if it was the jingle, you know, the tune to Toys R Us. But going into that store, being able to walk around and stare at aisles and aisles and rows of the greatest toys in the world. He-Man aisles, G.I. Joe aisles, of course wrestling figure aisles, Nintendo aisles where you could go and, like I said, you could flip over the cardboard or the plastic and you could see the back of the game, and you know how important that was to us back in the day. The only way we knew anything about this video game was to flip over the box and take a look, as if that would tell us anything about what we were about to purchase. The family memories. You know, going with my grandmother, going with my parents to Toys R Us. And not only the past, but some of the present memories that I've accumulated over the past 6 years now. Being a dad, I immediately introduced my kid to Toys R Us. I have a 6-year-old and a 2-year-old. And the 6-year-old has basically grown up in this room down here. So he's very familiar and very knowledgeable about 80s toys, about wrestling figures, about He-Man characters. In fact, he's got his own little collection of retro 80s toys. Bringing him into Toys R Us and letting him walk around and stare at the aisles in amazement was great for me to watch. I enjoyed watching him enjoy Toys R Us. He has lovingly come to know Toys R Us as the place where Santa Claus shops. And in fact, he calls it the ho-ho store. And so it was kind of tough for me to have to explain to him that Santa Claus would now be shopping somewhere else. I think all of us have to explain to our kids now where Santa Claus will be shopping. Many kids and many parents have responded with a little bit of apathy. Some parents have said, I've never shopped there. Too expensive. Could get the same thing at Walmart for cheaper. And that's probably true. But I would always walk through Toys R Us at Christmas time, birthday time for my kids, or just one of the days of the week that I felt like going and grabbing my kid an Animal Planet toy or a Star Wars toy or some Legos. I could have easily gone to Walmart, to Target. I could have easily sat at home and ordered it online. But I wanted to walk through those aisles because it truly was a place where a kid could be a kid. If the store's going to close, I'm bringing it home with me. And I was able to grab a couple of these shades from one of the stores in town that's almost done. One of these hangs proudly in my garage, and this one will get rolled up and put aside. There's not much else to say, guys. Stuff is changing. Childhood is changing. It's not the same. Because if it was the same, this would have never happened. Let's finish this up with a couple of commercials from the place where every kid could be a kid. Toys R Us.
Hey, you Toys R Us kids.
We have Sergeant Candy.
Jeffrey.
It's a bad to see you, boy. It's gonna be neat.
Jeffrey, what are we going to see when we get to Toys R Us?
Me, of course, the astonishing Sectors. Rainbow Bright in person and one of the Wuzzles to snuzzle.
Wow! It's the world's biggest toy toys, so let's go!
Check your local Los Angeles area papers for the exact time and day.
You're a Toys R Us kid,
So come on and join us.
Jeffrey!
We're going to the magic world that's called Toys R Us. It's a magical land, so where else would you go? When everything's a Toys R Us
and prices are low.
If it's new and hot,
it's a toy they've got.
and the prices are hard to beat.
You can search the whole world, but Toys R Us kids know it's the one and only place to go.
More games. More toys. Oh, fun.
It's the world's biggest toy, so let's go!
I don't want to grow up. I'm a Toys R Us kid. They got a million toys at Toys R Us that I can play with. I don't want to grow up. I'm a Toys R Us kid. They got the best for so